You want Philly, Philly? Let's talk the top 10 fillies for this year's Kentucky Oaks. Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host of this episode of Trust the Prophets. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Well, this is a top 10 episode for the Kentucky Oaks and the fillies that will be running in it in only a little over a month from now, the first Friday in May. And this is a wide open field. For as wide open as the Derby feels, the Oaks feels even like there's more parity between all of these groups, and that every single time we run a prep race, we have more questions that emerge from that than answers. Last year, of course, we had the dynamic big four of Kathleen O, Nest, Secret Oath, and Echo Zulu. This year, a lot of questions. Now, before we get into our top 10 list, just a quick reminder, make sure to press that subscribe button here on YouTube to follow Trust the Prophets. We got a ton of content for you, whether it's international racing, graded stakes racing, handicapping, live betting, whether it's top 10 lists and all this sort of good stuff, we have you covered. So we got you covered coast to coast, internationally. We're covering the best news in horse racing that you can imagine. So make sure to use this as your one-stop shop for everything horse racing and handicapping as we move further into the Derby season. Well, listen, speaking of the Derby season, like I said, we get more questions than answers every single time we run these prep races. And there's a great deal of parity in this particular crop. It's a fascinating group. Let us know below in the comments who you like as your top pick. Let me know a dark horse, because I feel like this year a dark horse has a really good shot at winning. And while you're at it, make sure to like this video as well. Well, let's dive into my top 10 list of Kentucky Oaks contenders leading into this. And you see I cheated a little bit at the bottom. I have 11 actually down there. I have a tie for 10th place. The tie is just in my own mind. But I am interested in these two horses at the bottom. And what you'll see is that there are certain areas, there are certain geographic areas, there are certain regions that are maybe a little more or less represented. I think the Florida region this year has been very weak. The Gulfstream Park region has been very weak. Red Carpet Ready will look like a nice horse. Maybe distance compromised. Early on, it looked like a nice horse, maybe distance compromised. A horse like Atomically, okay, we'll be running this weekend in the fair in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. We'll see, how she runs down there. She was a filly I was very high on back in November, but again, I feel like there's a lot of parity within this group, and there's still a lot of unknowns and a lot of question marks to be had. But let's start at the bottom of the list with number 10 horse, Miracle. This is a filly from Mendelssohn, and this is trained by Todd Pletcher. And like I said, she's the morning line favorite in this weekend's Gulfstream Park Oaks down at Gulfstream Park. And if you're there this weekend, make sure to come by and say hi. I will be there this weekend at Gulfstream Park. So if you see a guy walking around in his little cap, just wandering around like he doesn't know where he is, that's probably me, because I am usually oblivious to things when I'm in public. So come by, say hi. I'd love to chat with you about all the horse racing stuff. But anyway, let's talk about Miracle. She's the morning line favorite in this Gulfstream Park Oaks, which I think really demonstrates, quite frankly, the weakness of this overall field. Last time out, she finished second to Pretty Mischievous, and I thought a very gutty performance in the Rachel Alexandra at the fairgrounds. That was her first non-state bred race. So now Pletcher, and it should be pointed out, this was a horse that was with Rudy Brissett, went over to Pletcher's barn. Pletcher put this horse in the Rachel Alexandra. I thought she ran a heck of a race that day. Now is coming back, and the Gulfstream Park Oaks, I know what she's going to do. She's going to try to wire the field. She goes out front. She's got great early speed. That's going to be her game. If she wins this Gulfstream Park Oaks, then I think she really does kind of catapult herself at least to a mid-tier contender. I don't view her as necessarily a strong win candidate, but I do view her as then a legitimate contender if she really wins this weekend, at least establishes some semblance of order down there in South Florida and saying, okay, this is the horse that's going to come out of this circuit that we feel kind of at least halfway decent about. But she's a horse I really like a lot. She was a long shot play that I liked in that Rachel Alexandra, and she ran a heck of a race that day. Pretty Mischievous, we'll get to her in a second, but, no disrespect, losing to, by a very small margin, 3/4 of the length to her last time out. The other horse that's tied for 10th is a Peter Miller horse out at Santa Anita, and that's And Tell Me No Lies, who's going to be running next weekend in all likelihood in the Santa Anita Oaks. This is a filly from Arrogate. We've obviously lost Arrogate far too soon. There was a great story. I believe it was Thoroughbred Daily News that did it. Might have been DRF. I don't want to misrepresent who did the story, but it was about the last progeny of Arrogate, which is very sad to see. So, And Tell Me No Lies has that sentimental connection to Arrogate, and I think a lot of people will be rooting for this horse. This is a fascinating horse, though. West Coast filly that's kind of flown under the radar. She was really dominant last year out at Santa Anita, won the Chandelier, so she can do the 2 turns. I thought looked really good. Goes to the Breeders' Cup, runs 8th, doesn't run that well that day, but then comes back last time out and finishes second to Feza. Now, here's the thing. Feza is a Bob Baffert trained horse. Feza is not eligible for Kentucky Oaks points. So this is kind of what complicates things out there on the West Coast, which is Baffert is still running fillies and colts, for that matter, in Derby prep races, and that can kind of gum up the works a little bit in terms of who gets how many points. So by finishing second that day, And Tell Me No Lies got second place points, but the first place points were not awarded to anyone because it went to a horse that wasn't eligible to run in the Oaks this year. So an interesting horse. I'll be interested to see how she does in the Santa Anita Oaks. I think she's probably the strongest of the West Coast contenders, obviously. And I think that's a relatively weak crop this year. But last year we saw Desert Dawn kind of surprise a lot of people with a really strong run there in the Kentucky Oaks that first Friday in May. Let's move to number 9, a horse that I am very bullish on. And this is a horse that may not have had any points yet in the Kentucky Oaks, but I like a lot. And that's Punch Bowl for Brad Cox. This is a filly from Uncle Mo, and she's a bit of a monster. She's 2 for 2. She's already stretched out and successfully stretched out one time in an allowance race. She's finally headed to a stakes race. This is going to be the litmus test. She's going to run in the Ashland. She's going to have some big time competition. You see the names up above her: Wonder Wheel, Julia Shining. That's not going to be a field to sneeze at. That's going to be a serious test for this filly, but she's got a ton of talent. And I'll be interested to see what she does this next time out. I think she's got some real potential upside. And even though she doesn't have any points yet, in all likelihood, looking at the way this race is shaping up, if she just gets a 3rd place in that race, she probably gets into the starting gate. I think most assuredly into the starting gate for the Kentucky Oaks, because there's a lot of question marks and a lot of horses that are already clearly off the Oaks trail that have already been told they're going to cut back to 1 turn, and they might have already accumulated points, but they're not going to be running in the race. So I think she hits 3rd in that Ashland. She's in the starting gate of the Kentucky Oaks, and I think she's a really talented runner. Again, very limited foundation, only 2 career efforts, but I think very, very strong. Brad Cox has got a stable of both boys and girls here. Interestingly enough, Cox has been a little bit more successful with the Colts this year than with the fillies in terms of just accumulating wins of that breadth that you see. Obviously, he's got 2 very, very good ones up at the top of our list, but it is interesting to look at the statistics and just look at his overall winning percentage of Colts versus fillies, a little bit better with the Colts. Now, that said, let's move to number 8 on our list, Pretty Mischievous for Brendan Walsh. This is a horse that we just saw finish second in the Fairground Oaks just this past weekend. Next time out will be that Kentucky Oaks race. And listen, Pretty Mischievous, I think, is a really solid runner. 4 for 6 winning at this point. I thought she had the Fairground Oaks put away when she drew away from Hoosier Philly, which, wow, I don't know what's happened to that horse. I've seen some people say maybe go to the 8 bells, cut back to 1 turn. I think that's probably for the best. I never was particularly high on Hoosier Philly and always had a lot of questions about that horse. And she just is not that good. I mean, she's just not that fast, and I don't think she's that talented. And, when Tom Amos said that she's the most talented runner I've ever had, come on. Don't disrespect Serengeti Empress like that. She's nowhere in that same stratosphere. So Pretty Mischievous, I thought had that Fairground Oaks put away. And then Son of a Gun of Southlawn, the number 7 horse on my list, did not keep running and eventually get past her. I think she just got sucked up a little too close to the pace. Pretty Mischievous, that is, and probably got tired down a little bit that really long home stretch at the fairgrounds. She's an Into Mischief filly. So there is always those questions with the Into Mischiefs. Are they going to get the distance? Will they like this? So, very fast horses, but do they get the distance all the time? We, of course, remember Life is Good as one of those great Into Mischief progeny. So Pretty Mischievous, I like a lot, but I don't necessarily view her as a strong win candidate, but I think she's a horse you got to take seriously. And I think is, deserving of that number 8 ranking on our list. Well, let's move to Southlawn, who ultimately won that Fairground Oaks. And like I said, really used the stretch run to put away the rest of the field. Just kept gaining and gaining and gaining. You definitely like to see that. Demonstrated the ability to close, demonstrated the ability to wear down a field, demonstrated the ability to go a little bit longer. Always love the connections of Cassie and Raylu Gutierrez. This is a horse that is 3 for 5 winning on the dirt. If you look at this horse's running lines, there's a couple of turf races in there, kind of muddies up the form. This horse is pretty damn good on the dirt. And it's important to point out this horse, she made her debut against Wonder Wheel and also ran in the Grade 3 Pocahontas early on in her career. So there were absolutely expectations here for this daughter of Pioneer of the Nile. I like Southlawn a little bit. I don't think that win was a fluke. I think she's starting to unlock some things. And when you look at her racing lines, it's pretty obvious that last race at the fairgrounds, not just this past weekend, but the race before that, kind of unlocked something. You get Raylu on this horse. I like this filly quite a bit. I think she's a legitimate contender here for the Oaks. Now, then you move to a couple of Chad Brown horses that are going to be running next weekend in the Gazelle. Sheeta Beauty and a Colt. Sheeta Beauty, I like a lot. Won the Busher last time out, which was a one-turn race in the mud. That said, the way she ran, she looked like she absolutely wanted more distance. She completely outclassed Chad Brown's other horse and other filly that we really liked in this race, Asset Purchase, who's not even on the list anymore. She's out of Practical, or she's not out of, but she's from Practical Joke. And I just think she's a horse. When you watch her run, she wants more ground. She wants to go 2 turns. This is a pretty good one, I think. It's always questioning to know, how are you going to transition from 1 turn to 2 turns? How are you going to transition from running in the slop to running on a dry, fast track? These are questions that need to be answered still with Sheeta Beauty. But much like Southlawn, I don't think she's a flash in the pan. I think she's a very legitimate horse who won a big-time prep race already. And she went off that day as kind of the second choice, if I'm not mistaken, behind Asset Purchase. So it's not as if she was some long shot in the field. She absolutely was getting respect at the window, and I think is a really good Chad Brown runner. Now, the Chad Brown runner I'm more excited about, though, is number 5, a Colt. And the reason I like this filly so much, and I've been very high on this filly, and she's from Into Mischief like so many others, is she's already done the 9 furlongs. She's already done the 9 furlongs, won the Busanda. I think she's very, very good. I think she can do the distance. I'm expecting a big effort from the Gazelle. Brown has, I think, intentionally held her out of the Busher and is just kind of waiting to unleash her in this Gazelle coming up next week. She's, I think, again, a very talented filly. She's been on the work tab. I expect her to be very impressive here. And here's the thing. She's going to have to be, because she's only got 20 points. Now, that said, if she finishes, 4th or 5th, she probably does stamp her ticket to the Kentucky Oaks from that Gazelle. So, even if she doesn't win, she still definitely has a shot to get into the starting gate, even with an underneath type of performance. But I like that she's done the distance. And while there might not be a lot up in that New York circuit right now this time of year, I do think, she's one that when you watched her run last time out in that Busanda, you took notice. I mean, she just looked more impressive than the other fillies, more developed. I like her a lot. Well, let's move to, last year we had a big 4. I think this year we have like a mini big 4, maybe. Julia Shining starts that with, and that's the Todd Pletcher horse. Filly from Curlin, who's, of course, the full sister to Malathat. And last time out, she ran 3rd in that race at Tampa Bay in the Sun Coast. She's going to be coming back in the Ashland. I think she's only going to get better. That was a very speed favoring track that day. She is a grinder. I mean, she's a horse that needs to be really ridden aggressively in order to get where she needs to go. but I think she's still maturing. She's still figuring things out. She's only got 3 races under her belt, 2 of those wins and a third and what was a very competitive, I think, uh, Sun Coast Stakes down at Tampa. So I expect her to come back with a big effort here. But she's a filly who's obviously very, very talented, can absolutely get the distance. That's not going to be the problem. If anything, some of these races for her might have been too short. I think she absolutely wants to go longer. And much like her full sister, the longer she goes, the better she's going to be. And I think she's very, very talented, deserving, I think, of that number 4 slot on our top 10 list. Let's move to number 3, the horse that just edged her out actually for second place in that Sun Coast Stakes, Wonder Wheel. This is the future's favorite right now. And while I understand it, the only time she's run as a 3-year-old was in that Sun Coast. Before that, she obviously was the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies champion. She's a very impressive filly. She's won multiple ways. This is the thing you have to like about her for Mark Casse. And she's another Into Mischief filly, but she's one who can win multiple ways. She can win from coming almost dead last and then circling the field and winning. And she can win on the lead as well. She can wire the field. That sort of versatility, that extreme amount of versatility is rare to see in a horse. And so I think Wonder Wheel has that versatility no matter who draws into the starting gate. And this, I think, is a really important point. No matter who draws into the starting gate of the Kentucky Oaks, she's got a plan. That's important. Some of these other horses, Miracle doesn't have a plan. Miracle's got one plan, and that's I'm going to go to the lead. Okay? There's some horses in here who have one plan. Wonder Wheel's got multiple plans and can do a lot of different things. That gives whoever's riding Wonder Wheel an incredible amount of flexibility in the starting gate and a huge advantage, I think, because she's not dependent on pace. She's not dependent on the type of trip she's going to get. She can make her own trip in that regard. Very impressive. Mark Casse has raved about this filly for months now and said this is absolutely the best filly in his barn, best horse in his barn. He raves about her. So very, very talented runner. But the top 2 on my list are both trained by Brad Cox. One of them, you just saw run this past weekend, Botanical. This is a filly that Caitlin Free, who I spoke to on that Turfway Park Stakes preview, is extremely high on as well. I am too. Medaglia d'Oro. And I think she is really talented. She's 4 for 4 winning on the synthetic at Turfway Park. She started her career on the turf. Now, here's the thing. Before you go, well, it's the synthetic at Turfway. We'll see. Here's the thing. If you follow Kentucky racing, you know that Turfway Park shippers tend to run really well on the Churchill Downs turf, or on the Churchill Downs dirt, I should say. And this is not just I'm not saying this just because of Rich Strike. This is something that you see time and time again, that Turfway Park shippers do really well at Churchill Downs. And they take to that surface much better than other horses. So I think Botanical, you can expect her to make that transition to the dirt pretty seamlessly. Here's what I like about her. She's just continuing to get better. Every time out, she's just improving a little bit. She's 4 for her last 4. As I mentioned, she's won those 4 races by a combined 25 lengths. Not bad. Not too shabby. She has been putting away competition. She was challenged by her stablemate Flashy Gem a little bit this past weekend at the Bourbonnette Oaks at Turfway Park. Easily put away Flashy Gem after a little bit of a challenge. So I like that. Like to see that what she's capable of doing. Obviously has been racking up a ton of Kentucky Oaks points. But let's move to our number 1 filly who's going to be running this weekend in the fantasy, and that is Wet Paint. And she is the leader in the clubhouse, in my opinion. She's answered the bell every single time. She won the Martha Washington. She won the Honeybee. She's the queen of Oaklawn right now. But there still are questions about Wet Paint. In particular, those first 2 races at the track, the Martha Washington, the Honeybee, run in the slop. Looks like weather's going to be lovely this weekend for a change in Arkansas. So in Hot Springs, we're going to have a dry, fast track, or at least a good fast track. It's going to rain Friday, but not Saturday. We're going to have a fast track. Wet Paint is a deep closer. We'll see. Now, there's going to be a little bit more. There's going to be pace in this fantasy this weekend. There's some horses like Olivia Twist and Love Reigns and a couple of other fillies in this race that are going to push the pace, I think. But Wet paint, I want to see her do it on a dry fast track, because you never know, are these horses dependent, just does she like the slop? Those are legitimate questions to ask, because she's run on the slop, she's run on synthetic, she's run on turf, she's never run on a dry fast track. She's got a dazzling turn of foot when it comes to it. She's the daughter of Blame. I always love that Blame pedigree. And I just think she is a really impressive filly, but there are legitimate questions there. So when you look at this list, there's not a horse that I feel like is dominant. There's not a filly who I just feel so confident about. Yes, that's the one. I think it's going to produce a fantastic betting race for people. I think it's going to produce a lot of drama. I think it's going to be a very evenly matched field, a very evenly matched crop. And we're going to have more about the Kentucky Oaks as we get closer to it. And as we wrap up these prep races, I'll make sure to update my top 10 list after all the preps are finished and deliver it back to you here on Trust the Profits. Well, I thank you all for watching this top 10 list on the Kentucky Oaks Contenders. Again, remember to press that like button, comment below with who you like in the race as well, and make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits here on YouTube. Well, friends, until next time, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you that it's now post time.